A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So, Mr. Datta, should we start?
Sir, please start.
Yes. Thank you. Uh, Now, on the last day, we had done the 1961 Act, and under the 1961 Act, what were what is it that we had to consider, and what is it that necessitated the 1961 Act? Now, interestingly, and in the 1961 law, there was an amendment made in 1973 whereby Section 3 had been substituted to include the authority to approach the court, the where one could prove before the court that the agreement is null and void, inoperative, or incapable of being performed, or that there is no dispute between the parties. So this amendment was brought about. Why was this amendment brought about? What was the requirement or necessity of such amendment? Is something we will not do in such great details today. But suffice it to say that I had to add on to it and explain that there was another amendment also which is brought in. But however, by virtue of the 1996 Act, that entire all of these laws were repealed altogether. Now, we've seen the 1940 Act, the Arbitration Act of 1940. We've seen the 1937 law based on the Geneva Convention. We've seen the 1961 law based on the New York Convention. Now, we've also seen the nuances of the 1940 Act, which again was a great factor for the 1996 Act to be adopted. Now, let me put a question to the House. I will expect all of you to please consider answering this question as to what do you feel what the issue which could include both merits as well as demerits of the 1940 Act. What do you think were the pros and cons of the 1940 Act? So please write it in the the what do you call it, the chat box, so you can write it there. We've seen the 1940 Act, we've seen the differences in regime, and we've also seen comparisons between the 1940 Act and the 1996 Act. So I will want from you an answer as to what do you feel is are the drawbacks of the 1940 Act, or the merits also. You can comment upon them. We talk a lot of the demerits, but the merit would also be there. Mr. Ravindra Joshi, demerit, too much interference by the court. Yes, Mr. Joshi, you're absolutely right. So this contemplated a lot of judicial intervention, and that was one of the reasons also for the 1985 Act not being so, by 1940 Act not being so successful. Mr. Avinash Shukla, again, you're right, correct. So too much intervention of courts, correct. And procedure also at various stages, which is there. Mr. Joshi, Mr. Shukla, you're right. But will you again explain when do you feel there was a lot of interference of the courts? And others, I will request all of you to please respond, so that we get some good idea, or even if it's a mistake, not a problem. I mean, there's no harm in attempting. Yes. mm, K. Subranarayan Mahapatra, you are right, inability to appeal, but then appeal provisions were there against some applications pertaining to setting aside, and of course otherwise certain appeal provisions were there, but then you are again, but then that is a feature again of arbitration itself, that it does not countenance appeals to be filed. Mr. Singla says 1940 Act, as the people were not so educated, court intervention was required to safeguard interest Mr. Singla, interesting. That's an interesting perspective. Mr. Gupta says arbitration was not final without court degree. Absolutely, you're right. Mr. Shukla says at every stage, even after award was made. Mr. Shukla, you're right. Mr. Kazi, arbitration act was not arbitration law. It was like interesting comment. Uh, Mr. Agarwal says international arbitration not covered. Correct, you're right. But then again, there were other laws to do with that. Mr. Joshi says time limit is not specified. Mr. Joshi, perhaps you are a bit incorrect. If you remember, there was a time limit of 4 months, then again 2 months. So this time limit was there. Mr. Singla says international community was hesitant to go in for arbitration with Indian parties, and it was affecting, hampering international business. Yes, again, 1940s, World War years, possibly that could be, I mean, it was not tuned towards, but then again, 1940 Act was meant only for domestic arbitration. Yes, good. I'm very happy with the comments coming in. I will want more conceptual differences. I don't need sections. I don't need provisions. I need to know the conceptual differences. What you feel. Mr. Shukla was a toothless tiger, but then again, you're right. But Mr. Shukla, I will expect you to speak again. Sorry, Mr. Joshi. Again, Mr. Joshi says 1940 Act based on British rule. Mr. Shukla and Mr. Joshi, you're right, absolutely. But I will expect more conceptual answers from you. You were right. But then this is more like a newspaper commentary. Mr. Srivastav says ease of challengeability of award under 1940 Act jeopardized the purpose or existence. Yes, then again, correct. I mean, under the 1996 Act also to some extent, this was a common complaint. Further suggestions? The concept of an award being declared void. Mr. Singla says 1940 Act was not true ADR. You are right to a great extent. You're right. You're because ADR essentially would mean outside process. So then again, you are right. Uh, Mr. Shukla says timeline was not sacrosanct. You are right, but then timeline is not something which was timeline was strictly given, but the problem is you see it was more violated than followed. So that's an issue. Uh, but it was as far as the law is concerned, timeline was there. But again, Mr. Shukla says loopholes. What are the loopholes? No, Mr. Srivastav, 1940 Act did not keep it limited to public or private. It only said it also applies to the government. Small courts, small causes court, Mr. Gupta. Small causes court had no jurisdiction. You are right, but then again, under the 1996 Act also, they don't have any jurisdiction. But however, a suit could be filed before the small cause court on some issues of, say, fraud, etc., etc. So Mr. Sharma says mutual consent of parties in dispute is mandatory for arbitration. However, written agreement is not mandatory. If you look at the first schedule to the 1940 Act, requirements of arbitration agreement, then I think possibly you'll get your answer. But again, party autonomy, one of the greatest advantages or merits of that is that party autonomy was also given a lot of importance and it was also followed. Correct, Mr. Singla, you're right. 1940 Act required the award to be ratified by the court. Yes, so what was the procedure? What was the procedure for for the act to be ratified by the what had to be done? Mr. Natkar says 1940 Act was put in place. There was no alternative to courts, and probably an attempt was made to ease the growing volume, though of pending in courts. Though one had still had to have court intervention prior to award. Possibly, it made it easier for courts to give award based on the arbitral proceedings put before it. Uh, Interesting, very interesting perspective, Mr. Natkar. I'm very happy, the way you've approached this issue. But then again, we'll have to keep in mind in 1899 there was also an Indian Arbitration Act, and substantial provisions pertaining to arbitration were also included in the Code of Civil Procedure of 1908. You had the second and third schedules which were there, which were repealed later on. So again, Mr. Natkar, good. It's a very good perspective. Mr. Singla says to place the award before the court. Now, Mr. Singla, how is that supposed to happen? Or I mean, let's not keep it only limited to Mr. Singla. Everyone can answer that question. It has to be filed. So the award has to be filed, which under the 1996 Act, award is not required to be filed. Yes, Mr. Singla, you're right. The procedure was it had to be filed as a suit, then objections had to be taken, and then it had to be made a rule of the court. It had to be made a judgment of the court, based on which a decree would be passed. So again, this was a lot of procedure involving even the final ratification of an award. So it was essentially still the remaining job of the judiciary. Correct. I mean, so we find a lot more, even from your answers, you can see a lot more demerit in the 1940 Act than merits. Also, of course, we have the advantage of time, looking at it from a distance. Also, allows us the liberty of critically analyzing. Mr. Srivastav says 1940 did not affirm continuity of arbitrator or did not address the issue of arbitrator leaving the proceeding between. Vacancy in the office of the arbitrator is contemplated. So whether that can come under the vacancy, because that vacancy will have to be supplied by the court. Mr. Srivastav, perhaps that vacancy could be supplied by the courts. Okay, so with this, we've got great responses and answers to the questions put. I mean, to the issue, and of course, we can always approach it from various perspectives. But at the end of it, we find that we've been able to obtain a conceptual clarity on the 1940 Act, and then, of course, which will help us substantially in understanding the 1996 Act. So now, 1996 Act is also based on the UNCITRAL model. UNCITRAL is United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, which is again a body of the United Nations. So we've seen as to how at the instance of the United Nations, this uh, the UNCITRAL model law was framed, and based on which, in fact, even our 1996 Act, even the Arbitration Act of UK, that was also largely based on the model law. Now, UNCITRAL model law was adopted in the year 1985, and no, of course, it's undergone amendments from time to time. So, and UNCITRAL also provides arbitration rules, which again are used by the parties in ad hoc international commercial arbitrations. Now, UNCITRAL itself would not appoint arbitrators, but the rules would provide for the designation of an appointing authority by the Secretary General of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So now, there are these several bodies and all who've again made some vast contributions to the development of the arbitration regime across the world. But however, the contributions by UNCITRAL in this regard significant. So without further ado, let's you know see what is the basis of the 1996 Act, on what document is the 1996 Act based. And when you look at it, you will find that our law is largely a reproduction of the model law, but with, of course, some changes thrown in here and there. So let's quickly start off with the ancestral model law. Yes, would request someone to please volunteer. Yes, please, someone may consider volunteering to read.
Good evening.
Yes, will somebody read?
Yeah, good evening, sir. Nadkar here. Could I?
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Nadkar,
Explanatory
please go
note
ahead.
by the sir. Explanatory note by the Ancestral Secretariat on the Model Law on International Commercial Arbitration. Number one, the Ancestral Model Law on International Commercial Arbitration was adopted by the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, UNCITRAL, on 21st of June 1985 at the close of the Commission's 18th annual session. The General Assembly, in its resolution 40 by 72 of 11th December 98, recommended that all states give due consideration to the model law on international commercial arbitration in view of the desirability of the uniformity of the law of arbitral procedures and the specific needs of international commercial arbitration practice. Number two, the model law constitutes a sound and promising basis for the desired harmonization and improvement of national laws. It covers all stages of arbitral process from the arbitration agreement to the recognition and enforcement of the arbitral award and reflects a worldwide consensus on the principles and important issues of international arbitration practice. It is acceptable to states of all regions and the different legal or economic systems of the world. Number three, the form of a model law was chosen as the vehicle for harmonization and improvement in view of the flexibility it gives to states in preparing new arbitration laws. It is advisable to follow the model as closely as possible, since that would be the best contribution to the desired harmonization and in the best interest of the users of international arbitration, who are primarily foreign parties and their lawyers. A. Background to the model law. Number four, the model law is designed to meet concerns relating to the current state of national laws on arbitration. The need for improvement and harmonization is based on findings that domestic laws are often inappropriate for international cases and that considerable disparity exists between them. Inadequacy of domestic laws. Number five, a global survey of national laws on arbitration revealed considerable disparities or not only as regards individual provisions and solutions, but also in terms of development and refinement. Some laws may be regarded as outdated, sometimes going back to the 19th century and often equating the arbitral process with court litigation. Other laws may be said to be fragmentary in that they do not address all relevant issues. Even most of those laws, which appear to be up to date and comprehensive, were drafted with domestic arbitration primarily, if not exclusively, in mind. While this approach is understandable, in view of the fact that even today the bulk of cases governed by general arbitration law would be of a purely domestic nature, the unfortunate consequence is that traditional local concepts are imposed on international cases and the needs of the modern practice are often not met. The expectations of the parties,
Yeah.
as expressed in a chosen set of arbitration rules, are a one-off arbitration agreement may be frustrated, especially by a mandatory provision of the applicable law. Unexpected and undesired restrictions found in national laws relate, for example, to the parties' ability effectively to submit future disputes to arbitration, to their power to select the arbitrator freely, or to their interest in having the arbitral proceedings conducted according to the agreed rules of procedure and with no more court involvement than is appropriate. Frustrations may also ensue from non-mandatory provisions which may impose undesired requirements on unwary parties who did not provide otherwise. Even the absence of non-mandatory provisions may cause difficulties by not providing answers to the many procedural issues relevant in an arbitration and not always settled in the arbitration agreement.
See, I'm now, I'm not explaining it line by line because it's very self-explanatory, and once it's being read, I think all of us will be able to get what is the drawbacks and what is the reason which, due to which the 1985 model law was framed, and it was the states. It was more framed for the purpose of the governments to get guidance, and so a great work has also been done by the ancestral in this regard. So I think we can, as it is being read, we can understand, and so nothing much needs to be explained because this is in very simple terms. Yes, please carry on.
Number two, disparity between national laws. Number seven, problems and undesired consequences, whether emanating from mandatory or non-mandatory provisions or from a lack of pertinent provisions, are aggravated by the fact that national laws on arbitral procedure differ widely. The differences are frequent source of concern in international arbitration, where at least one of the parties is, and often both parties are, confronted with foreign and unfamiliar provisions and procedures. For such a party, it may be expensive, impractical, or impossible to obtain a full and precise account of the law applicable to the arbitration. Number 8. Uncertainty about the local law with the inherent risk of frustration may adversely affect not only the functioning of the arbitral process, but already the selection of the place of arbitration. A party may well, for those reasons, hesitate or refuse to agree to a place which otherwise, for practical reasons, would be appropriate in the case at hand. The choice of places of arbitration would thus be widened, and the smooth functioning of the arbitral proceedings would be enhanced if states were to adopt the model law, which is easily recognizable, meets the specific needs of the international commercial arbitration, and provides an international standard with solutions acceptable to parties from different states and legal systems.
Yes, please continue.
Salient features of the model law. Number 1, special procedural regime for international commercial arbitration. 9. The principal and individual solutions adopted in the model law aim at reducing or eliminating the above concerns and difficulties. As a response to the inadequacies and disparities of national laws, the model law presents a special legal regime geared to international commercial arbitration without affecting any relevant treaty in force in the state adopting the model law. While the need for uniformity exists only in respect of international cases, the desire of updating and improving the arbitration law may be felt by a state also in respect of non-international cases and could be made by enacting modern legislation based on the model law for both categories of cases. A. Substantive and territorial scope of application. The model law defines an arbitration as international if the parties to an arbitration agreement have, at the time of conclusion of that agreement, their places of business in different states. Article 1, 3. The vast majority of situations commonly regarded as international will fall under this criterion. In addition, an arbitrator is international if the place of arbitration, the place of contract performance, or the place of subject matter of the dispute is situated in a state other than where the parties have their place of business, or if the parties have expressly agreed that the subject matter of the arbitration agreement relates to more than one country. Number 11, as regards the term commercial, no hard and fast definition could be provided. Article 1 contains a note calling for a wide interpretation so as to cover matters arising from all relationships of a commercial nature, whether contractual or not. The footnote So Article 1 then provides an illustrative list of relationships that are to be considered commercial, thus emphasizing the width of the suggested interpretation and indicating that the determinative test is not based on what the national law may regard as commercial. Another aspect of applicability is what one may call the territorial scope of application. According to Article 1 into brackets 2, the model law as enacted in a given state would apply only if the place of arbitration is in the territory of the state. However, there is an important and reasonable exception. Article 8 into bracket 1 and 9, which deal with recognition of arbitration agreements, including their compatibility with interim measures of protection, and Article 35 and 36 on recognition and enforcement of orbital awards are given a global scope, that is, they apply irrespective of whether the place of arbitration is in that state or in another state, and as regards Article 8 and 9, even if the place of arbitration is not yet determined. The strict territorial criterion governing the bulk. Sir, just I have to pause. An important thing.
Yeah.
Sir, sir, may I request
Some
somebody else
interruption
to
there.
take over? Just, I need. It's an urgent thing. Sorry.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do that. Okay, sir. I can continue.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, sir.
Please continue.
My nephew.
So I'm sure people are being able to understand.
Yeah.
Not a problem. So people
Yeah,
are able to understand. This is the basic issue: is why the model law has been made necessary, and under what criteria the model law was conceptualized, and as to why the states were found to be inadequate. And we are looking at a model law on international commercial arbitration, which is to do more with bringing uniformity amongst the various jurisdictions with respect to arbitration, so that international businesses and all did not suffer on account of arbitration and due to the different legal in different countries, which would again not only lead to a lot of increase in costs but also uncertainty. And these are factors which are also accounted for by the by entities which make investments in foreign countries, including the legal regime and the law of contract, including the law of arbitration. So this is again with respect to and growth of and development of international business. This UNCITRAL model law became necessary, and the moment it was also sponsored by the United Nations, then again this assumed a lot of significance in the member states. So here now we are saying that what are the salient features of the model law. Once we go through, these are very simple to understand. In case we not being able to understand something, we can always discuss that. But perhaps these do not require much of an explanation, and we can go through them. In case any question arises, and if I feel that there is some issue we need to again touch base, then we will do accordingly. Mr. Natka, please continue.
The strict territorial criterion governing the bulk of the provisions of the model law was adopted for the sake of certainty and in view of the following facts. The place of arbitration is used as the exclusive criterion by the great majority of national laws, and where national laws allow parties to choose the procedural law of a state other than that where the arbitration takes place, experience shows that parties in practice rarely make use of that facility. The model law, by its liberal contents, further reduces the need for such a choice of a foreign law in lieu of the model law of the place of arbitration, not the least because it grants parties wide freedom in shaping the rules of the arbitration proceedings. This includes the possibility of incorporating into the arbitration agreement procedural provisions of a foreign law, provided there is no conflict with the few mandatory provisions of the model law. Furthermore, the strict territorial criterion is of the considerable practical benefit in respect of Articles 11, 13, 14, 16, 27, and 34, which entrusts the courts of the respective state with functions of arbitration assistance and supervision.
Correct. This is something which is similar as in Section 27 of the 96 Act, and supervision is something which the Indian system has, the regime has changed from the 1940 to the 1996. So again, here we do not have something on the issue of supervision as far as the 96 Act is concerned. Yes, please continue.
Yeah, D. Delimitation of court assistance and supervision. Number 14. As evidenced by recent amendments to arbitration laws, there exists a trend in favor of limiting court involvement in international commercial arbitration. This seems justified in view of the fact that the parties to an arbitration agreement make a conscious decision to exclude court jurisdiction, and in particular in commercial cases, prefer expediency and finality to protect protracted battles in court. Number 15. In this spirit, the model law envisages court involvement in the following instances. A first group comprises appointment, challenge and termination of the mandate of an arbitrator, Article 11, 13, and 14, jurisdiction of the arbitral tribunal, Article 16, and setting aside of the arbitral award, Article 34. These instances are listed in Article 6 as functions which should be entrusted for the sake of centralization, specialization, and acceleration to a specifically designated court, or as regards Article 11, 13, and 14, possibly to another authority, for example, arbitral institution, chamber of commerce. A second group comprises court assistance in taking evidence, Article 27, recognition of arbitration agreement, including its compatibility with court-ordered interim measures of protection, Article 8 and 9, and recognition and enforcement of arbitral awards, Articles 35 and 36. Number 16. Beyond the instances in these two groups, no court shall intervene in matters governed by this law. This is stated in the innovative Article 5, which by itself does not take a stand on what is appropriate role of the courts, but guarantees the reader and user that he will find all instances of possible court interventions in this law, except for matters not regulated by it. For example, consolidation of arbitral proceedings, contractual relationship between arbitrators and parties or arbitral institutions, or fixing of costs and fees, including deposits. Especially foreign readers and users, who constitute the majority of potential users and may be viewed as the primary addresses of any special law on international commercial arbitration, will appreciate that they do not have to search outside this law.
Okay. So as far as the arbitration agreement is concerned, you can read. Let's see. This is something to learn. We can learn from here. Yeah. Please continue.
Yeah. Arbitration agreement. Chapter 2 of model law deals with the arbitration agreement, including its recognition by courts. The provisions follow closely Article 2 of the Convention on the Recognition and Enforcement of Foreign Arbitral Awards, New York 1958, hereinafter referred to as 1958 New York Convention, with a number of useful clarifications added. A. Definition and form of the arbitration agreement. 18. Article 7 bracket 1 recognizes the validity and effect of the commitment by the parties to submit to arbitration an existing dispute, compromise, or future dispute clause compromissoire. The latter type of agreement is presently not given full effect under certain national laws. While oral arbitration agreements are found in practice and are recognized by some national laws, Article 7 bracket 2 follows the 1958 New York Convention in requiring written form. It widens and clarifies the definition of written form of Article 2 of that convention by adding telex or other means of telecommunications which provide a record of the agreement. By covering the submission type situation of an exchange of statements of claim and defense in which the existence of an agreement is alleged by one party and not denied by another. and by providing the reference in a contract to a document that is general conditions containing an arbitration clause constitutes an arbitration agreement provided that the contract is in writing and the reference is such as to make that clause part of the contract. B. Arbitration agreement.
Now,
Yeah.
yeah, so this is something which composition, again, this is competence jurisdiction. So let's do it this way. Maybe we can go through the clauses and then we can come back here and get some explanation once again. So uh, you know Mr. Natko, we can start off with the clauses.
Okay.
uh, yeah, so let's start off with the model law clauses, and then once we are done, I think we can come here if need be. Yes, please go on.
Yeah. Unsettled model law on international commercial arbitration, United Nations document A by 40 by 17 Annex 1 as adopted by the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law on 21st of June 1985. Chapter 1 General Provisions. Article 1 Scope of Application. The number 1, the law applies to international commercial arbitration subject to an agreement in force between this state and any other state or states. 2. The provisions of this law, except Articles 8, 9, 35, and 36, apply only if the place of arbitration is in the territory of the state, and arbitration is international if A. The parties to an arbitration agreement have, at the time of the conclusion of the agreement.
So I'll just
Yeah.
I'll pause you here once. So here again, all those Article 1, clause, sub-article or clause 1 says that it refers to international commercial arbitration. But then again, if you look at clause 2, it generally does not apply to domestic arbitrations. Now, again, the provisions of this law, except such and such articles, apply only if the place of arbitration is in the territory of this. Now, interesting because it also puts in a domestic twist to it. So now, what is an international arbitration? Again, this is something which is very similar to that contained in our statute books. As we see the 96 Act, we'll also get some idea. But and I mean, this is something which is, we've moved away a bit from the foreign award concept, and now we are talking of an international arbitration. Yes, please read.
An arbitration is international if A. The parties to an arbitration agreement have, at the time of the conclusion of the agreement, their places of business in different states, or B. One of the following places is situated outside the state in which the parties have their places of business. Roman 1. The place of arbitration if determined in or pursuant to the arbitration agreement. And 2. Any place where a substantial part of the obligations of the commercial relationship is to be performed, or the place with which the subject matter of the dispute is most closely connected, or C. The parties have expressly agreed that the subject matter of the arbitration agreement relates to more than one country. 4. For the purpose of paragraph 3 of this article, A. If a party has more than one place of business, the place of business is that which has the closest relationship to the arbitration agreement. B. If a party does not have a place of business, reference is to be made to his habitual residence. Number 5. This law shall not affect any other law of the state by virtue of which certain disputes may not be submitted to arbitration or may be submitted to arbitration only according to provisions other than those of this law. Article 2. Definitions and rules of interpretation. For the purpose of this law, A. Arbitration means any arbitration, whether or not administered by a permanent arbitral institution. B. Arbitral.
So I'll just pause you here.
Sir.
Now, I'll just pause you here. So now here in clause 1, subclause article 1 clause 5. Now again, this also encapsulates the concept of arbitrarity within it. And if you look at clause 4, now clause 4 is again, it is more of an enabling kind of situation. And we've seen 3. So, and if you see article 2, the definition of arbitration here and in the Indian Act, it's the, I mean, it's absolutely the same. So whether or not, neither an exhaustive definition, nor does it give a lot of details. But then again, this is an understanding of arbitration. So this is a very open-ended definition. Similarly, the 1996 Act has also adopted this same definition. And as far as, in fact, arbitral, tribunal is concerned, again, that is the same definition. But court onwards, our definition keeps changing. Please read, Mr. Nag. Yes, please read.
Sorry. Yeah.
Mr.
Article
Naki, you
2.
can proceed.
Yeah. Actually, I was mute and I didn't notice that. I unmuted. Okay, sir.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
Yeah. Article 2, definitions and rules of interpretation. For the purpose of this law, arbitration means any arbitration, whether or not administered by a permanent arbitral institution. B, arbitral tribunal means a sole arbitrator or a panel of arbitrators. C, court means a body or organ of the judicial system of a state. D, where a provision of this law, except Article 28, leaves the parties free to determine a certain issue. Such freedom includes the right of the parties to authorize a third party, including an institution, to make the determination. E, where a provision of this law refers to the fact that the parties have agreed or that they may agree or in any other way refers to an agreement of the parties, such agreement includes an arbitration rule referred to in that agreement. Where a provision of this law other than in Article 25A and 32A refers to a claim, it also applies to a counterclaim, and where it refers to a defense, it also applies to a defense to such counterclaim. Article 3, receipt of written communications. Number 1, unless otherwise agreed by the parties.
Yeah, just get the yeah, we'll just get the concepts clear.
Yeah.
So now the Article 2 was basically the definition. Now the definition of arbitration, arbitral tribunal is the same. It's been written by in the Indian law. The definition of court again is a specialized definition which is there in the Indian law. Indian law is not the same as far as the definition of court is concerned. Now D, E, and F are included in the 1996 Act conceptually at various places, although they may not be together at all places at the same time. But again, they are conceptually, those have been retained. And in fact, the definition section is much more wider in the 1996 Act. Now, as far as Article 3 is concerned, this is again similar to Section 3 of the 1996 Act. Please read.
Article 3, receipt of written communications. Unless otherwise agreed by the parties, A, any written communication is deemed to have been received if it is delivered to the address personally, to the addressee personally, or if it is delivered at the place of business, habitual residence, or mailing address. If none of these can be found after making a reasonable inquiry, a written communication is deemed to have been received if it is sent to the addressee's last known place of business, habitual residence, or mailing address by registered letter or any other means which provides a record of the attempt to deliver it. B. The communication is deemed to have been received on the day it is so delivered. The provisions of this article do not apply to communications in court proceedings. Article 4. Waiver of the right to object. A party who knows
Yes.
that any
Now this,
sorry,
yeah, please. Oh,
select
no, that's all right. So now, as far as Article 3 and Section 3 are concerned, Section 3 is almost an exact reproduction of Article 3, but then I'm talking of the 1996 Indian law. But then there are some divergences and changes made here and there. Say instead, for example, instead of communications in court proceedings, it's been changed to communications in respect of proceedings of any judicial authority. So in this manner, there are some changes was made. And if you look at the 1940 Act, which we've covered, Section 42 also comes close to it. Now, Section 42 was more of a procedural provision where application was made to all the notes that were needed to be served otherwise than through the court. Now, as far as the written one is concerned, 96 Act understanding we will study a bit later. But now, suffice it to say that it's by and large based on the 1996 Act, on the model law 96 Act. But then there are some changes and divergences made here and there. And in fact, the next article which we'll be reading, Article 4, is also similar to Section 4 of our 1996 Act. Please read.
Article 4. Waiver of right to object. A party who knows that any provision of this law from which the parties may derogate or any requirement under the arbitration agreement has not been complied with and yet proceeds with the arbitration without stating his objection to such non-compliance without undue delay, or if a time limit is provided therefore within such period of time shall be deemed to have waived his right to object. Article 5. Extent of court.
So now, yes, I'll just pause.
Yeah.
I'll just pause here. So now again, in as far as Article 4 again, it finds a reflection in Section 4. Now, Section 4 basically arranges it a bit better, but then by and large, again, it's almost very close to the Article 4 unsettled model law that we are reading right now. Yes, and in fact, Article 5 also finds a reflection in Section 5 of the 1996 Act. Please read.
Yeah. Article 5. Extent of court intervention. In matters governed by this law, no court shall intervene except where so provided in this law. Article 6. Court or other authority for.
No, I'll just pause you here. This is.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a very important provision in the sense, although this may be a single line provision, but if you look at it, the greatest number of complaints against the 1940 Act was primarily because there was a lot of court interference and people had to rush to court at the slightest of pretext. So again, this is something which is a marked difference between the 1940 and the 1996 Act. Under the 1996 Act, again, it's been specifically mentioned that the courts shall not intervene. But under the 1940 Act, again, nothing to that effect was there. And courts would regularly intervene in arbitration and like proceedings. So again, this is very significant because it basically limits also the power of the court to intervene in matters of arbitration. Yes, Article 6 again, you find a reflection of it in Section 6 of the 96 Act, which deals with administrative assistance. Please read.
Yeah. Article 6. Court or other authority for certain functions of arbitration assistance and supervision. The functions referred to in this article 11.3, 11.4, 13.3, 14, 16.3 and 34.2 shall be performed by each state enacting this model law specifies the courts or where referred to therein other authority competent to perform these functions. Chapter 2, Arbitration Agreement.
Yes, as far as the Indian law is concerned, yes, I just pause you.
Yeah.
As far as the Indian law is concerned, it makes certain changes to in its application of Article 6, And then the Indian law contemplates primarily administrative assistance for facilitation of conduct of the arbitral proceedings. Now, this is administrative assistance. Then there is also the issue of the court helping in the arbitral process, including in evidence taking and all. So now moving on to chapter 2, article 7 again finds a reflection in section 7, which deals with arbitration agreement. So let's see what does it say. Please read.
Yeah. Chapter 2, Arbitration Agreement, Article 7, Definition and Form of Arbitration Agreement. Arbitration agreement is an agreement by the parties to submit to arbitration all or certain disputes which have arisen or which may arise between them in respect of a defined legal relationship, whether contractual or not. An arbitration agreement may be in the form of an arbitration clause in a contract or in the form of a separate agreement. Number 2, the arbitration agreement shall be in writing. An agreement is in writing if it is contained in a document signed by the parties or in an exchange of letters, telex, telegrams, or other means of telecommunication, which provide a record of the agreement, or in an exchange of statements of claim and defense in which the existence of an agreement is alleged by one party and not denied by another. The reference in a contract to a document containing an arbitration clause constitutes an arbitration agreement, provided that the contract is in writing and the reference is such as to make that clause part of the contract.
Yeah. So this is a very interesting. In fact, this arbitration agreement definition is also largely retained in section 7. Now, with respect to arbitration agreement being in the form of arbitration clause in a contract or in a separate agreement. Now here, it is specifically stated that the arbitration agreement shall be in writing if you read clause 2. Now clause 2 again has been taken away in 96 Act and put into subsection 3. So because of the significance of it, it's put into a separate subsection under the 1996 Act. Now again, the agreement is to be in writing. What are the conditions? 96 Act has 3 grounds. Here again, you can break it up into the grounds. And because these are the essential requirements of an arbitration clause, these requirements should be would have to be followed for a valid arbitration agreement. Yes. So I think, Mr. Natkar, let's do it this way.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick break. So 10 minutes, and then we come back, and then we will start off from Article 8. And then right now, what I am doing is, our basic objective is quickly run through the. We'll quickly run through the model law so that we get to know, what how does the model law interact with the Indian law, rather what are the changes brought about in the Indian law and the variations in the Indian law. But we are talking of the 1985 model law, which again was subsequently amended. Again, it is being amended, but of course, I'm talking, we are dealing with it from the perspective of the 1996 Act. What is the definition of state, Mr. Kazi? Good question. It appears it means a nation or a country. You're absolutely right, Mr. Kazi. When you talk of from an international law perspective, it means countries and nations. So, Mr. Vivek Srivastava last had, an answer, did not affirm continuity of arbitrator or did not address the issue of arbitrator leaving the proceeding in between. Again, this is something which we have discussed. Okay, so good question, Mr. Kazi. So what we do is that let's come back, and then we will also we are quickly running through the provisions, so that's why I'm not giving a detailed explanation and will not do, say, a judicial analysis of each of these provisions, but it will give us a good idea if we just manage to glance through the provisions and get some of the concepts in mind. It will become very easy to navigate through the 1996 Act. So by this, we are by and large prepared for substantial portions of the 1996 Act. So it will be very easy for us, moment we are done with these, for us to get something on the model law and a good idea on the model law. So also of the 1996 Act. So with this, let's come back after a quick 10 minutes break.